All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. You can go ahead and continue to enjoy your healthy lunch. This is a big task to introduce our keynote speaker. I've known Tom Burke for decades now, decades. And as we were putting together this symposium, the first person that came to mind for who to ask, who we hope we could get to talk with us in this noontime session, was Tom. And the reason is because, for my money, when you look across public health, there's been no one who's been more effective at really blending the research, policy, and practice worlds to great effect than Tom. So Tom is from the environmental health sciences field. So, he's not someone that we have the pleasure of working directly with in injury and violence prevention. But he is someone, as I said, that if you don't have to look very far in public health in order to see his impact. And his career has just been a fascinating sort of story of science, of advocacy, of service, of impact on a whole host of issues in the environmental health field. He actually started out in the New Jersey state government, so he worked for a number of years, as I think you'll hear a bit about, trying to keep the Jersey beaches clean. He's been at Hopkins for a couple decades, we're fortunate to say, and has just been a leading voice, a friend to all, as to how to make research, how to make science matter. And at this time in our country, I really can't think of a more important conversation to have than making sure that science matters. So, Tom, I'm thrilled you're here. In addition to spending time at the school for a couple decades, making enormous contributions to the teaching curricula, to being a real leader and friend to many, Tom is recently back from a couple years in the Obama administration where he was the director of science at EPA. So he was on the front lines for the past few years of making decisions about how policy is made using science, how science can inform those policy debates, and again, on issues that are at the forefront, not just of public health, but on the public's mind. Quite frankly, even though we're old friends, when I reached out to him to be here today, I thought, boy, he's just coming off this couple years of service in D.C. Got to be prepared for the no, because I'm sure that he's got a lot going on. But I couldn't even get out the ass before he said yes. Just tell me where to be. So, Tom, I really appreciate you being here and look forward to your remarks.
All right.
All right.
So how would you like to be maybe the last science advisor at EPA? Yeah, just think about that. And thank you, Shannon, and it is great to be back. And I'm going to give a talk from the heart. I kind of always do, and it's great to be back in this room. So what I want to try and do here is encourage you. Encourage you to be moved by your science to move others into action, because we're at a real difficult time, and it's not just environmental science. And I'm going to give you some examples, but I also want to share with you the excitement of an incredible ride that I've been on. And so let's get started. Hopkins doesn't have the best electronics here, so which way do I point it? Sorry for those of you on the web. We have great electronics at Johnson. Okay, thanks. All right. So it's really cool to be here because I was sitting right about there on January 20th, a little over 8 years ago, with a packed Feinstein Hall here. And on the screen, we had President Obama presenting his inaugural address. Now, I'm I'm a child of the 50s and 60s, and I'm from Jersey City, New Jersey, and I lived through the darkest days of race relations in this country. The race riots of Jersey City and Newark. I saw things as a kid no kid should have to see. And it was an incredibly special day for me to watch Barack Obama take the oath of office. So I'm sitting there and thinking, this is something I never thought I would see in my lifetime. And it was an emotional day for a lot of us. But then he says, my administration will value science. We'll make decisions based on facts, and we understand that facts demand bold action. And I'm like, where do I sign up? I could work for this guy. Not only does he play basketball, I love this guy. And it's interesting because Keisha and I had spoken about him as a freshman senator. And Keisha wanted to quit Hopkins, right, and go work for him, and said, there's this rising star. And me, the old mentor, said, so I'm like Yoda now, I'm old, right? Learning you are. So I said, he's really great, but it's not his time. It's Hillary's turn. He's just a freshman, right? And man, oh man, so when Keisha pays attention to something, you pay attention to what she's thinking, because I thought I was pretty astute, and I come from a pretty strong background in politics. Even as an undergrad, I was working in City Hall in Jersey City trying to bring reform to a very corrupt political machine in Jersey City, New Jersey. And so I always felt like, I kind of know politics. And anyhow, it was just thrilling to watch that. And particularly, I never thought, so there are two things. First of all, I never thought I'd live to see an African-American president. And it was a special day for the country, like, wow. But for a president to also talk about science and action, I mean, this is the translation guy. This is awesome. So anyhow, I waited, and sure enough, the phone rang. Right, and it was pretty cool, because those of you who ever come to my office, you'll see Robin, who's been my assistant for 25 years, and it was great, because the phone call comes in, and she goes, Tom, it's the White House. And I said, I'll take it. So I took the call, and it was someone from the Office of Science and Technology Policy in the Executive Office of the President. And they said, Tom, I'd like to talk to you. Would you have any interest in possibly joining our leadership team? So I thought for about a nanosecond, and I said, okay. And I said, I got to get a suit. So anyhow, a very long process began, and some of you who are here as students and fellow faculty, at the time I was the dean for practice, and so it's a tough thing, because prior to this administration, there's an incredible vetting process that you have to go through, right? And so just word to the wise, if you have ambitions of high-level service to your nation, to our nation, keep your nose clean. It's really important, and it's really important that you not cut corners. And there's been a lot of discussions about conflict of interest and things like that in the current administration, but we have a pretty tough system that involves security clearances and background checks. And man, oh man, they sent Secret Service and FBI way back to my grammar school. So, they didn't find out that I kicked Joseph Gargiulo down the stairs once, but he was a bully, and I couldn't stand bullies, and I still can't stand bullies. You know what I'm saying? So, anyhow, so I joined the administration, and I wish that my mother had lived long enough to see this, because, like, wow. President Obama. I knew there was going to be a press release from the White House, but I didn't think it would be the president announcing it. I'm like, yes, okay. So I want to set up the connection because it is actually about science. Now, when I was a kid, I dreamed of going to the White House as a basketball champion. You know, because the championship teams get invited to the White House, and you know, you give a jacket to the president or a jersey that says #1 and all. And I figured, I love sports. I have to tell you that I love being a professor here, but I would rather be sitting there with Charles Barkley commenting on basketball games. And I wish that I had been an NBA star, but I couldn't jump, and I was too slow. And I can't dribble all that good with my left hand, but man, did I have heart. Anyhow, so the announcement comes out, and I, after a long, tumultuous process with Senate confirmation, because environment and public health are really controversial. And we'll talk about this, I hope, in the discussion period. There are very major interests, whether it be the NRA, or Big Pharma from some of the discussions that you had earlier, or in my case, the American Petroleum Institute, the American Chemistry Council, big food, big agriculture. They get nervous about somebody who's going to present the science honestly and forcefully. And that's really what I've done all my life. But anyhow, I got to tell you, I had a great ride. And that person to my right there is Gina McCarthy, who I was really blessed to have worked there during a great administration with a president who, after healthcare and the progress made there, was really committed to being the environmental president. And when you really look at all the threats, now he had to fight wars, he had to deal with an incredible violence epidemic, but he also knew, taking the long view, the public health view, that this planet is in trouble. And when I was a kid in the 50s, and some of you have taken my courses know I still play the duck and cover public service announcements that tell you supposedly how to survive a nuclear blast, right? No way. I've always been really concerned about global threats. And this climate stuff is real. And we can deny it, and we can be in the Flat Earth Society, or we can be guided by the science. And what I want to talk about is really not that issue per se, but how do we fulfill our obligation as scientists to inform the policy debate? And what are the lines, and how do we get better at it? And also, I want each of you, so sometimes when you get an introduction like that and you hear somebody talk, you think, like I used to feel this way about D.A. Henderson and Al Sommer and everything, like, damn, he eradicated smallpox. Not bad, right? And the millions at a time stuff at Hopkins. You can do this, all right? We can all do this. I had no connections. I grew up from nowhere. If it weren't for the anti-poverty programs after the race riots, I would have never gotten an education. If it weren't for fellowships and things like that, you know, I'd be working in the post office. I knew exactly where I would be. I'd be a letter carrier like my father. And you have to understand that you have a gift to be here and to learn with us and to develop your scientific skills. And you have an obligation to think about why you're doing that and how you're going to make a difference. So now I got to tell you about, I've been inspired by teachers all my life. So hence the education thing. I remember, because I had nuns who would beat the crap out of you and all this other stuff that turned a lot of Irish Catholic kids off to education. But my first calling is really a teacher, I think, and I love to teach. But I just spent 2 years down there teaching people. But boy, did I get schooled one night when I was called to the White House. And this is a picture I took. So Barack Obama, there was 18 months left in the administration. And suddenly, I get this White House envelope from Barry, right? And it says, join me for a reception at the White House. And I'm like, whoa, this is pretty cool. Because, you know, you work for the president, but so do like 500,000 other people. So it's not like you get a lot of face time. And I could bring my wife. So the cool thing about this is I was able to share this journey with my family too. And it, you know, it just makes it, because my family put up with a lot of crap having me in that job. Like, I was always on a train going to Washington at 5 in the morning, or I was always on a plane going to Flint, Michigan. But I got to share it, and I want to tell you about that photo, because I took that photo. And there's one cool thing about Barack Obama when he's giving a talk. First of all, when he gives a talk, man, you're in. He just, like, the room is focused on him. He walks in, and the only person who's cooler than him, and this was like, I got some selfies from the Christmas party, the only person who completely overshadows him is when Michelle's there. And she's standing there, and he's talking. But anyhow, so he comes in, and he has no prepared remarks or anything. And he begins to talk. And so some of the top political appointees from each agency are invited, and the president's cabinet was there. So Margot's with me. And we're two kids from Jersey City, right? And never forget, my mother always said, never forget where you came from, all right? And believe me, that helped me in Flint, and that helped me through everything I do. And I'm there, and I'm thinking, oh my God, this is better than winning a basketball championship, right? I'm standing here, and there he is. And he comes out. Now, you can't see that picture, but it's a beautiful painting of Abraham Lincoln. We're in one of the smaller rooms at the White House, and we're gathered around. And Margot, you know, like John Kerry is next to Margot, and she's wearing high heels that are uncomfortable, and she's about to faint, right? And it was like, wow, this moment is incredible. And he begins to talk, and he says, first of all, he does this cool thing when he's talking that when I see great speakers, I try to imitate them, because it's just amazing how he speaks. Current president doesn't do that, and he doesn't, you know, get you really feeling great and warm and fuzzy. But Barack Obama, when he talks, he looks right into your eyes and right into your heart, and he moves his head when he's talking. And it's not because there were teleprompters there. So I love that side, because he wants to make sure that everybody in the room is part of this conversation. And he said, thank you for being here. And especially thank you to the family members who are here. We have 18 months left. And Michelle could tell you down to the day and the minute how much time we have left. And I know you're tired. I know you're really weary. And I know it's tough. Many of you have made great financial sacrifices to serve this country. Your families don't see as much of you. And he told a little joke about it. So the salaries are crappy. I got to tell you that when you're a political appointee. And so the salary was never an issue with me. But yeah, there was a sacrifice there. But some of the biggest sacrifice was the time, the incredible commitment. 24/7 worrying about the environment of the United States during a time of Flint and the Gold King mine disaster and drinking water crises all around the country, and running a huge organization of 15,000 people and 2,000 scientists is an enormous job. And a briefing book this big every night to take home and read on the train when the guy next to you is flatulent and chewing gum and everything else. And so because I couldn't afford to move down to D.C., because suddenly landlords in D.C. think D.C. is San Francisco, and there's no way for me to even get a tiny little cubbyhole to stay there. So I'm commuting, and he's talking about sacrifice. And he said, we have 18 months left, but you will never have an opportunity to serve this country and to serve this world like we will have together over the next 18 months. And so, he doesn't. I'm asking you to stay with me. Finish your tour. Let's do this together. In the next 18 months, we can achieve great things together, but I need you. And I understand the sacrifice. And I know it's hard. And I know many of you are really tired. And everybody in that room was sleep deprived and really tired. And then, first, Barack Obama points to Abe Lincoln. And he said, think of the sacrifices that have been made for this country. I'm asking you to stay with me. I'm like, whew. It was amazing. It was amazing. And that's what's so magical about service, about science, because I'm thinking, why am I here? How did this happen? How cool is this? And how committed is this man? And how committed are these people in this room? And I can tell you, there wasn't one person there who didn't, as I walked away, and I didn't include the photograph here, but I took a selfie in Union Station at like 6:30 at night, my last day there, and I just walked to the station, and you know that there's this thing in sports where you say you just leave it all out on the court. Man, I left it all out, and I'm standing there, and I take the selfie, and I'm like, whew, what a run. It was fantastic. So I want you to feel that same kind of inspiration. I know it's tough now, because there's stuff going on that is really, really hard to take. But I want you to know that you will never, ever see more dedicated people than in the federal government who have devoted their lives to what we do. And we're different. I mean, we're in public health because of that same devotion. And we want to make change. So now to reality. Sorry I get choked up, but that was really emotional stuff. And then I shook his hand. I was like, shit. You know, it was great. It was better than any kind of championship. But so let's go back to today. Because you might imagine it's hard to be back here. Well, it's great to be back here at Hopkins, but it's hard what's going on. And I'm sure you're all affected. I mean, we don't have marches for science all the time, right? We don't have thousands of people really concerned about the future of the scientific basis for decision making. And so this is just a sampling of today's headline, and there's a third one there. So in the Times today, I'm reading the Times, and coming back from Switzerland, and I just missed ditching in the North Atlantic, and I'm happy to be alive. And I open up the Times, and there's the headline, 23 environmental rules roll back in Trump's first 100 days. I'm thinking, damn, I've only been gone 103 days, and it's so different. What is going on? And then there's another headline. The new EPA administrator was the Attorney General, pretty much there to defend the oil and gas industry. And the U.S. Geological Survey releases the results of their study that says that Oklahoma's largest earthquake was linked to oil and gas actions 3 years earlier. This incredible increase in underground high-pressure injection into areas where there are geological faults in Oklahoma. And you all know the Oklahoma story. It's like Shaky Town now. It's amazing. There are more earthquakes in Oklahoma than California. And what happened in 100 days? So anyhow, the third one there is, so yesterday, it's a true story coming back from Switzerland. There was like a fuel leak in the engine, and even the pilots looked really scared when they were telling us, get out of the plane, bring all your belongings, we are not coming back. So that's my Arnold Schwarzenegger imitation, but a lot of people in Switzerland kind of sound like Arnold to me because they have that little German tint. But so anyhow, there's another headline there that I couldn't copy, but that I should, and that's a headline that I made from yesterday when I spoke at a conference at the Health Effects Institute on air pollution, and I talked about how climate affects everything, and it's absolutely essential for us to not think about climate when we're doing public health, when we're protecting water supplies, when we're protecting the resources of this country, whether it's the agricultural resources, whether it's water, whether it's air quality. Climate matters. The first thing you do when you get up in the morning is say, what's the temperature out there? And we adapt, right? forget the oil and gas industry, we in public health have to prepare for a changing world. And so I said that, and it made headlines as a former EPA official. But anyhow, but there is some good news. You all heard the skinny budget from the president that came out. The OMB released a budget that just devastated first NIH, many of the public health agencies. If you look across the board, the State Department, potentially the CDC because of the links to repeal of the Affordable Care Act. But EPA was right in the crosshairs, and with the biggest cut of all the agencies, a 31% cut across the board. But when you really looked at it, the climate programs or anything that might be connected to climate was zeroed out. And so this was really interesting because the new administrator of the EPA was basically the Attorney General in charge of the oil and gas industry and the promotion of oil and gas as the economic base for the state of Oklahoma. So anyhow, I was really relieved. I get an email the other day that they passed the CR, continuing resolution, and EPA took some hits, but not 1/3 of the budget, because 3,000 people that I work with are about to lose their jobs there, and it's grim times. It still is. We'll see what happens in October, but I thought it was interesting as I prepared this talk. So there's certain untouchables in the U.S. right now, and one is energy and oil and gas. You think of who runs the country, but there's another one too. So I'm reading through the budget, and I see there are little riders on the EPA budget, and they're not much, but one thing that was absolutely there in black and white prohibited, right? And here's how it goes. To stop EPA's anti-growth agenda that includes various harmful, costly, and potentially job-killing regulations, the bill contains a number of legislative provisions. A prohibition on the regulation of the lead content of ammunition. So, man, the gun industry is just amazing, amazing. And here I am trying to, one of the great accomplishments in my lifetime of EPA has been the restoration of the bald eagle and the predator species, and they are so loaded with lead right now because of lead in the environment from birdshot and fishing lures and things like that. And there we go, because I know the frustrations of violence researchers, and when you think about how untouchable certain aspects of gun control are, and how we all take that common hit, it was interesting to see that there. But so these are tough times, and so there's Scott Pruitt, and some would say, and this is not just EPA. When you think about it, one of my good friends from the administration is David Michaels. David Michaels was the head of the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. We're working on a commentary for Science Magazine right now about certain changes in the transition and legislation proposed on the Hill about the conduct of science. But these are tough times. And it's not just about stopping climate science. It's about the denial of climate science, but things that I was personally involved in on pesticides, on drinking water quality. There were 23 rules there. And this is being promoted very effectively as success in rolling back overreaching regulations. And where are we? Because we are witnessing a rolling back of public health protections. And that argument is not being effectively made by us. This is our bad, too. It really is. So I want us to get motivated about that. So first, a little history, because when you're old, you got to reflect on your whole career, and I wasn't always in the Obama administration. Let's face it. So there was a time when I focused on other things, but I have to say, so I don't want to espouse any particular educational philosophy, but I was very fortunate. I mentioned the anti-poverty programs, and I got into a summer program because with 5 kids in the family and my father's very small letter carrier's salary, I qualified for anti-poverty assistance. And so to get kids off the street in Jersey City after the riots, they had good summer programs, and I was able to get admitted to a pretty good Jesuit high school. And I had to work my way through, and I had a job to pay the tuition, but the motto was, and this, I'm sorry, it sounds sexist, but it was a boys' high school. So the motto was a man for others, a person for others. And you don't think about yourself. Think about what you can do. And this resonated with me because, if you're an Irish Catholic and you grew up when I did and you saw John Kennedy's inaugural address, and he said, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. So I bought into this stuff. I sound like a real political wonk, but I guess I bought into inaugural addresses at a pretty young age. So anyhow, I thought that my life would be devoted to what I saw all around me in Jersey City, which was an incredible wave of heroin, bringing high crime and deaths of my friends. And seeing action. So I played rec basketball all the time. And I remember in the summer leagues watching kids snort as we were playing ball with the old steel backboards and the chain nets and things. And it was all around. And so my first job out of undergrad was a teacher at the alternative high school for kids who were dipping and dabbing in drugs. All right. And if you can intervene with a 13-year-old and a 14-year-old, you have a chance. And it was amazing the success of that early intervention and good education was there. So I thought I would do that, but then my father got lung cancer. And I learned about public health, and I went to the University of Texas. And this map was an epiphany for me. Because I'm from, is this also a, I guess not, huh? Does this point? Well, so you know where Jersey is? You can tell my accent. Forget about it. So I go to University of Texas. I have a Jersey accent. I play basketball with guys down there, so they give me this nickname, Tex, which was disrespectful because I had a Jersey accent. But in my first epidemiology class, the NCI released the first cancer maps. So this was before GIS, before, all that cool analysis that you can learn about spatially and all that. And here are the first maps, and damn, if it's not an incredible depiction of New Jersey's nation-leading cancer rates. And my home county, Hudson County, New Jersey, my father died of lung cancer, the highest lung cancer rate out of 3,000 counties. What are the odds? What's going on there? Look at that. There's a lot of asbestos there. There's a lot of shipbuilding. You can see the ports are definitely hit by cancer mortality. This is men, but actually a similar pattern for women. So this wasn't about smoking. This wasn't some of the things that went on, but it was big news. So here's a headline. Jersey is cancer crazy. Long before Louisiana, which is now called Cancer Alley because of the petrochemical industry and very high cancer mortality down there, Jersey was Cancer Alley. And so I begin to look at this epidemiology and realize this is wrong. There are things about the New Jersey environment that I knew about as a kid. And so I finished my MPH, and I went down to Trenton, and I talked to this new agency, the Department of Environmental Protection, and I said, I want to work for you guys, and I want to address this issue. They didn't have a job for me. They brought me on as a temporary forest ranger, working out of Tidal, and I got to design an investigation of what's going on with carcinogens in New Jersey, and it became the basis for now the National Toxic Release Inventory. I worked to develop a cancer registry so they could actually get accurate epidemiologic data and surveillance of cancer mortality and morbidity in New Jersey. And it was amazing when things line up and you have the right kind of political support, because New Jersey was responding to this. But as you might imagine, the same people who tried to keep me from getting confirmed in the Obama administration, I'm a 24-year-old baby with very long hair, very full hair too, unfortunately. Unfortunately back then. But anyhow, back in '76, all right, the chemical industry knows it's Cancer Alley. People are very concerned about hazards in the drinking water and in the air. You could smell your way around Jersey back in the mid-'70s. You really could. You could blindfold me, and I could tell where I was, which way the wind was blowing, particularly in Hudson County. And the only time it smelled good was when the wind was blowing from Hoboken, because Maxwell House Coffee was there. And so you got a little relief from the refineries that were out west. But anyhow, so there was always this battle of stakeholders, and that's key to what we're doing here. How do we make change? You got to be aware of the stakeholders. And anyhow, with the right kind of guidance, and I worked there. I was first. So here's the nonpartisan part about this. I was appointed by Governor Brendan Byrne, a Democrat. I was appointed the day after Jimmy Carter got elected. So I went back after my MPH, and I'm, like every new MPH, I'm jobless, right? So I'm sleeping on my mother's couch and realizing how bad this is. And I go down to Trenton and talk about, because I want to do public health, right? And I'm on fire about this cancer thing. And anyhow, so I get the job appointed by a Democratic, in the administration of a Democratic governor. But it didn't matter in New Jersey. There was real concern about the environment. There was real concern about the health of the people. And why? Because this story touched everyone. We have to connect with how the story of our work touches everyone. Think about Jimmy Kimmel and what he did so effectively that no scientist could do. That resonates with me too, because I have a hole in my heart. So that's kind of early history. And I have to say, having been part of Brendan Byrne's administration, 2 administrations of Tom Kean, admittedly moderate Republican, but bipartisan support, and then Congressman Jim Florio before coming down to Hopkins, I felt like you could be a scientist, you could transcend the partisan politics of science. I was asked to be Deputy Commissioner of Health in charge of all of public health in New Jersey in the second term of Tom Kean, and it was an amazing ride for a pretty young MPH and the youngest deputy commissioner ever in the history of the place. So my roots were, how do you bring about this change, all right? How do we bring it from this NCI map to cancer in the environment? And you can see how there were no GIS. This is India Inc. maps. And there's our first report on cancer in the environment. But it brought it home, down to the county level where people could see what was going on. And it categorized the major industries there, what people were employed in, how we concerned. We didn't say this is causal. We said we have to start looking at water quality. We have to start looking at air quality. And you know what? When we did the science, the water was loaded with chemicals. The groundwater was loaded with chemicals. And the air was really bad. And the science moved things forward, along with the emotion and the connection. So then there was, so I lost a lot of hair. I got old, and then I got to go down at EPA, and it was amazing. And I want to talk about that a little bit because it was really gratifying on a national level to lead a research organization and be on the forefront of things. And so this, you think about what's going on environmentally, you're not hearing a lot about this now, but whether it's the wildfires out west and the incredible exposures to people to the particulates from wildfires, which is about 40% of the particulates that you're going to be exposed to next year, whether it's the concern about cancer from artificial playing fields that you may have heard about, soccer goalies, perhaps having exposures from these recycled tire crumbs, the incredible challenge of addressing the Zika outbreak. I was there, so you all imagine, like, hey, wouldn't it be cool to go to the Situation Room someday? So I get to go to the Situation Room one day, And it's about Zika. It was the early briefings of Zika emerging from the Caribbean and concerns about Puerto Rico, where it really had a toehold already, and there was a culture that was resistant to prevention. And I saw how unprepared we were as a nation for the cultural challenges there. Also got to go out to Flint and lead the science behind the response to Flint. But I want to give you an example. So that thing in the middle there, that's a fracking site. That's what goes on while they're doing fracking. And you know, you hear all different kinds of things about fracking. And there's Lake Erie, and there's Toledo almost losing their drinking water to an algal bloom with the very, very serious chemical toxins that are produced by harmful algal. And there's the Gold King mine disaster. So I had a lot of things on my plate, and here's just a few examples. It was a busy job. The environment affects us all. And you can say, well, this is interesting, Flint. Baltimore's no different than Flint. It's the same challenges here. It's the same old infrastructure. We just haven't looked. So whether it's the droughts and the climate change issues, the pesticides that you consumed in your lunch, really, I'm sorry, but it's true. Or whether it's just the issue of environmental justice and disparities, not just in healthcare, but disparities across the board in the design of our communities. There's lots going on. So I want to just quick talk about fracking, because I want to give you hope about this thing about translation to action. So fracking, close your eyes and think of fracking, right? You don't have a clue. It sounds horrible. They should have named it something else like energy extraction from a really big hole in the ground or a really deep hole. But so what is fracking? It's a really complicated process that's above and beyond the old, Jed Clampett, poke an oil well in the ground and hope for easily achievable oil. But it goes deep into using explosives and fracking chemicals. It goes deep into I got to stay there, right? Uses billions of gallons of water mixed with thousands of chemicals to fracture the earth and make available those oil and gas resources. And one of my big assignments was there was an ongoing, so the oil industry was always under pressure from environmental groups that, you got to do this fracking right. You're not regulated. You're putting the wastes, you're dumping it into rivers, you're changing drinking water supplies, you're injecting it underground, there's earthquakes, all this other stuff. Tom Burke, would you please figure this out? So I'm in charge of the fracking investigation for the administration and the impacts on drinking water. But I had 8 years of history that I inherited that was incredibly controversial, and we did it. We did a national look at fracking and the impacts on drinking water, and where there had been a lot of hedging on it, and I'll tell you why the hedging. So there's a big transition in the nation's energy now to renewables, but really to natural gas. Your gasoline's a lot cheaper right now, thank a fracker. But your natural gas is also a lot cheaper now. And we have been able to convert our old coal-burning power plants by the hundreds to much cleaner burning natural gas plants because of fracking. So there's benefits to this technology. On the downside, if you don't do it right, you cause really big, irretrievable loss of natural resources like groundwater supplies. Because once you mess up a groundwater aquifer, you can't just go in there and clean it up. Not with the kind of contamination that fracking is. And so, after fits and starts and 10 years of work, we pulled together the research and made the case that we don't have a disaster on our hands, but we got vulnerabilities that are really important, that if you're going to do this, if you're going to extract energy this way, you got to do it sensibly. And we put that report out there. We also laid out how those impacts could happen. And I have to say, you can get really depressed that Scott Pruitt is the EPA administrator. You can get really depressed that the Secretary of State was the CEO of the same people who were trying to stop you from doing this study. But good old Maryland, they made my day. So even when it seems like you've got nowhere to go with your data, we have to keep pushing. Well, what's this all about? In my last interview was with Gina McCarthy, that little woman in the first picture there, an incredible person, EPA administrator. And she had one question for me, the coolest job interview question I ever had. She goes, so Tom, she has a Boston accent, Tom, I'm mad at Boston right now, by the way. Keisha gets it. What are you afraid of? So I did my Barack Obama. Nothing. That was my answer. I'm thinking, that's the best interview question I ever heard. What does a Jersey City kid say to that? So I said, nothing. And I got the job, right? And then the next thing is, do you have any questions for me? I said, yeah, why do you want a public health professor? And she said, because it's all about public health. It's all about protecting health, and I want you to reconnect regulation, environmental protection to its public health roots. And when you think about it, how do we do this? It's the public health approach, the Bernie Geyer paper, the first course you take in problem solving, defining the problem, understanding the magnitude, the core functions of public health. I won't read the whole thing, but it's so amazing that what we do can actually respond to this question that you're all talking about today. How do we translate into action? So how do we get there? Attention to the science. You start fudging on the science, cutting corners, getting a little bit too advocate before the science gets you there, you're going to get in big trouble, all right? Attention to the science, transparency, inclusiveness. Make sure you're addressing the right questions. There's a lot of good research out there, but I don't know what the hell to do with it because it's in the journals, but it ain't ever going to be in Jersey City or in Flint, Michigan, right? Remember why we do this. I went to a poster session yesterday, and there were great posters, but not one poster said, why do we do this? Why did we look at this endoplasmic reticulum response to flagella in air? Like, what the heck is that about? Very nice. It's published. So tell the story. Connect on the human level. One of my most poignant moments, I consider myself to be pretty grounded in community health. I'm out there in Flint, and I'm meeting with the pastors in a church in Flint. And Gina McCarthy introduced me, said, we brought Tom Burke, our science advisor. And one of the pastors, she stands up and she said, Dr. Burke, all due respect, we don't need no science projects. We need clean water. Remember those words. We don't need no science projects. We need to be in touch with what we're doing here and why. Tell the story. Understand the perspectives of the stakeholders. Who wins and who loses? Think about your research. Who's going to be really ticked off at you? And how do you have to understand their part of this, what they lose? Be careful about science-based advocacy. One of the problems with EPA is we're being painted it's science advocates. They're not scientists. They're just advocates. They're these crazy enviros. That really is damaging. We have to watch ourselves. Don't get in front of the data and pay attention to the public health approach. So I'll stop there. We can do this stuff. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Great inspirational words. So we have some time at this point in the afternoon for questions for Tom or discussion topics. Let's have a conversation.
How tall Barack Obama is. And who was the two tallest guys in the room?
You're wandering away from the mic, Tom.
So we're like, and then he points at another tall guy.
You got to speak into the mic.
Okay,
Remember our online audience.
Sorry, you just missed the best part. Questions?
So who wants to
Observations?
start us
Yeah. Come on, Sterling. Keisha.
I'm going to let Keisha go first.
Because Sterling, I have a little video of you when you heard that I was going on this job from my Senate hearing that you guys made that I can play. So I didn't bring it, but anyway. Yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Tom, for a very inspirational talk. I was just wondering if you had some words of wisdom for people who are sort of coming up in the field as scientists who are really interested in climate. I had a conversation recently with a junior investigator who is really interested in climate but feels like she's ruining her career potentially if she focuses on that right now. And I was encouraging her that that's not the case, and I just would love to hear your reflections on that about people who might be a little fearful right now of entering this space where they feel like it's not really politically feasible to be in.
That's a really important question. I hate it when people back away from things that are really important to public health because of opposition, all right? So I'm going to ask you all, what are you afraid of? And I hope your answer is nothing. But yeah, there are things to be afraid of, but particularly on climate. And Keisha was part of the meetings that we just had in Switzerland. It was amazing. Switzerland is in deep trouble without those glaciers. Imagine the Alps with no water, with no snow-peaked mountains. Imagine the cultural change that they're facing. But this whole thing about, well, climate, here's what happened with climate. The coal industry, the oil and gas industry, were really concerned about regulation and stopping of their natural progression to advance their industry. The issue was framed as a war on coal and a war on energy independence, and never appropriately framed on something that affects everybody. Everybody in this room is affected by climate. Every organism on Earth depends upon a certain natural environment. And we, the scientific community, got too caught up in the carbon debate. So people think about polar bears and glaciers falling into the ocean. But they never really think about the kids in Baltimore this summer during the heat emergencies. They never really think how ill-equipped we are for the next big one in Baton Rouge that washes away the roads and a lot of people with it. And so public health, the public health approach, I think we blew it. And so if you don't want to do climate regulation, I hate regulations, forget about them. Let's do the science that tells the story and shows the impact in a more effective way, because we're not doing this science as the basis for new regulation. We're doing it to protect public health, and that message isn't out there. So I implore you, that's why we do injury prevention. It's not to regulate certain products. If that's a way to assure that things are safer, that's part of the, but it's mostly about information, advancing the science, and together with stakeholders, figuring out solutions to things that kill people.
So I have a question about your last slide. You mentioned advocacy and careful advocacy and not getting ahead of the data and that sort of thing. It feels like in this environment, you really have to go at, if you want to make an impact, you have to go at a subject or an issue with just kind of a furious intensity and stand on your desk or no one will listen. And how do you balance those two? In an environment where people are consistently pushing back, how do you get over this wall without overstepping?
Yeah, boy, that's, and this was, the question about, do you march for science, or where's the advocacy line? We all understand that there is a line between science and policy, right? That a policy decision really is supposed to integrate a lot of social aspects and political aspects and what's doable, whether it's technically feasible or affordable. But the science isn't the answer. But too many of us, and the journal editors are partly at fault here, when we write the science up and we get to the discussion session, stick to the science. Present what it means. Too often I see journal articles, and I review a lot of articles that skip from showing an impact or presenting the data and saying, therefore, we need to not eat meat on Monday to address climate change. Or therefore, we need fences around dairy farms. Your data didn't say that, all right? Your data said there's an incredible impact of agriculture on the quality of our environment, and that's important enough. Don't jump over from the science. That's what I mean by getting ahead of the data. And I think when we do that, when we think we have the solution and we don't sit down with the stakeholders, with the data to craft the solution, we're guilty of overstepping it. And so I would say, I know, and it's tough sitting down with the American Chemistry Council, but when you have data on an effect of a chemical, the best thing to do is to not prejudge of what the regulatory solution is, but get the right people in the room, see what that data means, and go from there. And it's painful, but that's the way to do it, particularly in this climate. If we don't, we will be continually exposed for getting ahead of the data and being advocates, and we risk losing the credibility of our science. It's really that important. Great questions. Yes?
Hi, thank you so much for a great presentation. My name's Erin Rainey. I'm here from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And you also have some people here from a state health department. So you're talking to some folks in practice who are probably trying to defend evidence and science leading up right now. So I just wondered if you have advice or examples about what happens if you hit a wall with that internal dialogue on the practice side where maybe science isn't a value or maybe it isn't compelling to leadership. How do you still advocate for what you know is right for the field and not lose your integrity, but maybe pivot or find a way to move forward in that gray area?
That's such an important question. So think about all the things we know are potentially harmful and what we can really do. And you have to pick your battles. You really do. And I joked with, I saw lots of my colleagues at EPA yesterday at that meeting, and I said, I probably would have been carried out in handcuffs with, trying to deal with this new guy, because he directly turned back things that I had worked on, risk assessments on chlorpyrifos, a neurologically damaging pesticide, and said, well, no, we want to do the real science now. And them's fighting words, right? But so it's discouraging. It really is. But if you walk away, they win, all right? You have to figure out ways to stay in the battle. And many of us have been involved in really tough social issues in the past. And it's incremental. You have to see public health as a roller coaster. And we're like going down right now. It's one of those rough times. But this too shall pass. And now, if lives are at stake and people are dying, that's a tough one, and it's time to make noise. But it's time to make noise as a group to go out to your stakeholders and make sure they're informed. But to take that on as a professional within an agency doesn't really help the agency at this point, and it's really tough. So I understand what you're up against. I understand what so many career professionals are up against in the agencies right now. But think of it as this is a time to be more thoughtful than ever, to put your nose to the grindstone on the science and ask yourself, how do we do this better? How do we tell the story better? And what are their interests and how can we serve them? Because nobody does public health to kill jobs. That's what EPA is, the job kill. It's not about that. It's about protecting public health. But if they want to promote jobs at the agency, we have to think, how can we support the right kind of jobs that are protective, that do take care of miners' health and things like that? So it's time to huddle up and say, okay, we need a different strategy here. But confrontation right now, I'll do that. I'm a political guy now. I was appointed by the president. But I really think the scientific community has to guard the transparency and the integrity of science right now and pick our battles very carefully. Thank you. So what are the coolest jobs in public health right now? Are you guys ready to be right on the front line? You gotta be. You gotta be. Because who would think this is a cool job, right? I had all the big interest groups in the country questioning what EPA did. And I never had more fun in my life, all right? Why are we in public health? Because we go to the problems. You could have made money lots of other ways, selling stuff, right? Building buildings. But you came to public health because we go toward the problems. We try to solve them, and we try to solve them with good science and good information, and we can do this.
So I'll take the moderator's prerogative here. So you've been on the side of both the scientist and the administrator in a number of ways at the state level, at the federal level. What advice do you have for people in both of those types of positions for how to work most effectively together to make sure that science and policy are proceeding and practice are proceeding together in the best way possible?
It's a great question, and my colleagues from federal agencies will know sometimes we in public health are our own worst enemy. Because whether it's the funding streams or one department versus another, we are siloed. And I know it's kind of a stereotype of government that it exists in silos, but it's really true. But science transcends those silos. It really has to. And so I have to admit, it wasn't fun meeting with the science advisor from the Department of Agriculture about pesticide hazards. Because their mission is to promote U.S. agriculture, and the farmers are just adamant that they need these pesticides. And so we don't care that babies' brains might be affected. Well, of course they care. We have to meet that middle ground. And so it might seem in injury prevention that you're never going to get on the same page with various interests that want to improve public health, for instance, by advancing jobs and promoting economic growth and certain products and things like that. You think about, do we really, I know you had some discussions about the opioid epidemic and accountability there. I think we need a new way in public health, a more comprehensive way to do what in the risk assessment field, that's my thing. It's called problem formulation. And it's at the beginning of our work that we have to sit down and think, who should be at this table and who can help me formulate this problem? Who has an interest in this? And how do we ask the right questions to serve our key stakeholders? And that's when you should have the question. Most of the problems with people not getting along is when the research is done and you drop it on them. And you say, oh, by the way, we found out that what you do, your bread and butter, is not safe. Well, wait a minute. Why didn't we have this conversation 5 years ago when this project started? And so I would like to suggest that public health approach, that slide that I showed, is a way that we can get around. But that problem formulation, that first step, is when you invite people in, not after the cow's out of the barn. And I think we don't do that. Yes? It's scary asking questions, isn't it? The first time I went to a conference, I'm a MPH student, and it's a big conference hall, and I step up to the mic, and I go to ask the question, and nothing came out. I couldn't speak. It was so embarrassing. So I hope you can get the question out.
Well, I'll give it a try.
Yeah.
My name is Vika Chaplin. I'm a public health analyst at the Educational Fund to Stop Gun Violence. And so following from Shannon's question, when you are doing that work, straddling the research and the policy world like we do, with one of those industries that you described earlier as untouchable, which often feels very true to my experience, do you have any suggestions for how to do just that, how to engage people who may not want to have that conversation at all with such a hot topic?
Well, so it's interesting. EPA has a tremendous regulatory range, and so people were constantly trying to knock down my doors to get in and talk to me, so I didn't have that problem of not engaging. But I understand what you mean there. Sometimes they would rather avoid talks with researchers. And a lot of us are afraid of the appearance of conflict of interest if we get too cozy with them, right? Because let's face it, in most fields of science, there's a cottage industry that supports industry or tears our epidemiology apart or attacks things to find the weakness in science, particularly if it's related to policy. So I don't have any kind of universal solution to that. But it has to start before the crisis. It has to start before the high stakes are so escalated. Now, that's going to be pretty hard with gun violence, and we're probably past that point with the opioid epidemic as well. So there's 2 points when they're willing to talk. One was when they're at risk, and they need the credibility of working with science. And the other point is ongoing relationships. We are guilty of not fostering our relationships with industry. And we can't do that anymore because they run the world. And we're there to serve public health. And so we got to think of new ways, not just with community groups and our usual stakeholders, but with the powerful. So I want to tell a little story of the fundamental difference. So I'm down in Washington about a month ago with some really heavy hitters in environmental health, and we're meeting with the heads of NGOs, and we're saying, my God, the ship's going down. Look at this, they're cutting EPA to nothing, and they just appointed Scott Pruitt. What do we do? And I said, well, what would big industry do? And it wasn't funny, but one of the heads of the NGO says, well, first they would write a really big check and give that to the various candidates or members of Hill committees or Senate committees that are influential to help their campaigns, or maybe to fund the inaugural ball, or things like that. Now, we can't do that. What power do we have? We have the power of information, power of science, and we have to build the support of the public that we serve. And right now, I would say that relationship is at an all-time frail level. Now, the change in events in Washington is solidifying that, but we have to seize that opportunity and reconnect with who are our constituents and how do we bring them to the table, because we can't write those big checks. I probably shouldn't have said that on the internet. Sorry, I didn't really mean that. I don't think they write big checks to members of Congress. Just kidding. So it pays to be old sometimes, too. My kids are raised. Hunger is terrible. Yeah.
All right. Well,
All
thank
right, we
you,
done?
John. Yeah, thanks very much.
Hey, thanks a lot for putting up with me. Take care.